Applause for our Westmo friends. Awesome. Hey, it's just really great to be with you all. John, my brother who was out here, it's funny he uses a story about lumberjacks. Doesn't he kind of look like a lumberjack? Let's be honest, huh? Hey gang, it's so good to be with you. Before I dive into what I want to talk about today, I want to just share a little bit about what the Partner Network is. Because we get all kinds of questions about what is this Calvary doing? In fact, someone not too long ago came up to me and said, are you guys like starting your own denomination or something? Are you like creating your own synod? No, that's not what this is at all. In fact, quite the opposite. A few years ago, Westmo approached us, some of their team, as you saw in the video, and they said, hey, we need some help, and we see what's going on at Calvary, we want to partner with you. And that's really how the idea for a network, an intimate network of congregations began. We said, hey, we are better when we work together. And here's what we all know about ministry, especially over the last 15 to 20 years. It's gotten really hard. It's gotten a whole lot harder than it ever was. In fact, I would say this, ministry is just too hard for any of us to do it alone. And so we came up with this idea of what if we were to create an intimate network of churches that said, hey, we are better together. That it's just too hard in this day and age for us to think we can go it alone. And so we came together, our leadership team, they blessed this idea, and we thought about how is it that we can share ministry together? And one of the ways was simply for us to share resources. As a church of our size, we produce ministry tools every week, and so we thought, well, what if we were to just share those, to say, you know what, we're not going to be selfish about this, we're just going to put it out there to share with other churches. And so we've got a website, it's called calvarypartners.org. You can pull it up on your phone, and we just put all the content that we create each week out there, we just give it away. We thought, that's a great first step. But what if we were to take it a step further and have conversation together? And so what we do is monthly, we have webinars where we talk about kind of various aspects of ministry, whether that be getting ready for Christmas, or how do we do kids ministry, or how do we put on a really big vacation Bible school. We've started these monthly conversations where we get together online and we have conversation. And then we thought, well, let's take it even a step further and let's develop some relationships. And so for those of you that are partner churches, you know that weekly we're having conversations with your leadership team to talk about how do we troubleshoot some of these issues that we develop in ministry. And the last way we thought, hey, we could take this even a step further and we could bring folks here to Calvary, and that's what you're all doing here today, the Calvary Conference. I want to recognize 4 churches that are here that are doing really, really hard work. They're our first 4 partner churches, and I'm going to have their church leader come up here because we have a gift for them. So first, I want you to give a round of applause for Noah Johnson from Holy Cross Lutheran Church. Noah, come on up here. Come on up here. Noah is from Holy Cross in Duluth. And then Brian Katz is from Peace and Hope. Get this, Brian drove all the way from the state of Virginia to be here today. So we want Brian. There we go. And then Mike Carlson. Where's Mike? Mike, come on up. He's at First in Sauk. And then lastly, Maddie Elliott from Westmo. Come on up here. Come on up here. We wanted to start by recognizing you all for the really, really hard work that you are doing. We know this because you're in conversation with John and with myself on a regular basis, and so we just want to say thank you. We've got a gift basket for you with all kinds of goodies in there to hopefully help you survive the day today, right? And you can decide if you want to share them with your church or not. But how about one more round of applause for these leaders? Awesome. Our partner network is really built on three ideas. The first idea is this: if we can gain clarity as churches, clarity about who we are and who God calls us to be, we have a much greater chance of thriving as a church. The first thing I think all of us as churches we want is clarity. And one of the hard things about the last few years is it's felt like we've been doing ministry, and you know when you get bugs on the windshield of your car, and then you hit the little wiper, and then it just smears them? I think the tools that we've used for ministry in the past are kind of like the wiper blades. We're going to try it, but it's just smearing those bugs, and it's hard. And so what we want to do is to help, selfishly help ourselves and help all of you gain some clarity about what is God calling us to do and to be as a church moving forward. And then if we can get some clarity around that, then there are some practices that lead to vitality. There are ways that we can engage our people in ministry that lead to this sort of vitality. And lastly, I think one of the things we all struggle with, especially if you come from a mainline church, is we struggle with adaptability. Raise your hand if your church struggles with adapting. Some of you are lying in church right now, right? Because your pastor's sitting with you and you're going, oh, how's he going to feel about this, right? We all start, let's just be honest. I come from the Lutheran tradition, and the most exciting thing we do from time to time is switch the color of the hymnal, right? We struggle to adapt. So here's what we want to do. We're going to start with clarity today, and that's going to be our theme for today. And we're going to spend the morning getting clear about the state of things, the state of the church. We're going to get clear about the state of what our families and our students are wrestling with. Dan is going to talk a little bit about that. And then Dave is going to talk about the state of technology, how technology has changed our world very rapidly in the last few years, and what that means for the church. We want to get very clear about that. And here's the thing about clarity. Clarity always begins with, say it with me, honesty, with honesty. And I think sometimes that is really hard for us in the church. Because if we're honest, we just want things to be nice. We don't want to create tensions. But clarity, the kind of clarity we need to navigate a ministry, it takes honesty. And so this morning might feel a little bit heavy. It might feel as though we're sort of saying some things that kind of raise your shoulders a little bit. It might feel a little bit heavy, but we want to be really honest about the state of the church, the state of our families, the state of technology, so that we can be honest and gain the kind of clarity we need. And then this afternoon, Todd is going to come and he's going to talk about the kind of leadership that's needed to navigate these kind of times. We're going to gain some clarity about the type of leadership we need as churches. I love clarity begins with honesty. I love that. And actually, if you're a Lutheran, many of us are Lutheran in the room. Martin Luther had something to say about this. Way back when, he wrote this in his Heidelberg Disputation in 1518. He said, "A theology of glory calls evil good and good evil. A theology of the cross," read this with me, "calls the thing what it actually is." I think that's the hardest work of leadership in the church, is calling a thing what it is. Because calling a thing what it is, it creates tension. In Matthew, Jesus looks at his disciples, specifically Peter. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, read this with me, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" Caesarea Philippi, if you've ever been there, it's sort of at the base of Mount Hermon. And it's this unique spot where it feels like it's kind of this little, it's almost like, it feels like you're in this little oasis, you're kind of hidden away. And it's like Jesus pulled his disciples aside and said, "Hey, we need a period of time. I just want you to be honest with me. Who do people say that I am?" And they replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah and one of the prophets. And then Jesus looked him right in the eye and said, "But what about you?" He asked, "Who do you say that I am?" You see, clarity begins with honesty. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about just the state of the church. And if you're a pastor, you know all of this. If you are not a pastor, this might be some new news for you, and it might feel a little bit heavy. So I just want you to bear with me this morning, because I think, again, clarity begins with honesty. How many of you have ever been driving down the road and all of a sudden a rock hits your windshield, something like this happens? Anybody ever had that experience? I think we've all had that experience. And here's what I normally do when that happens to my car. I ignore it, right? It's down in the corner. It doesn't get in the way of me seeing anything. And so it's going to take a lot of work. I got to call my insurance company. Then you call the glass person, and you got to get it fixed. You got to take it. I usually ignore it. Any of you ignorers like me, right? I ignore it. And here's what I think. Way back prior to the pandemic, for many years, I think we sort of knew that something was different in the life of the church, but we kind of ignored it. Like we knew that people would come up to us and say, hey, do you remember the heyday? Or hey, pastor, before you were here back in name the period when so-and-so pastor was the pastor, man, things were kicking here, right? But we kind of ignored that. I mean, as pastors, if we're honest, we're like, yeah, I've heard about Pastor Johnson before. Yep, he's great, right? But we sort of have ignored it. But then along the way, if you've ever had a crack in your windshield, here's what happens. You hit a pothole, right? And then it cracks. You've had this experience. And as church leaders, as people who care about our church, every once in a while as we lead, we'd have moments where we sort of hit a pothole, if you will. And it sort of creates a crack. And so maybe for your church, it looked like this. You didn't have enough kids to keep the preschool going. And so you had to suspend that program. Or maybe it looked like this. The people weren't coming to choir practice on a weekly basis like they used to. And so we're going to move the choir, and they're only going to sing about 4 times a year, and they're going to practice right before church starts. Or maybe it looked like this. There weren't enough kids for vacation Bible school a whole week long, so we're going to shorten it to about 3 days, and we're going to do it in the evenings for just a couple of hours because it's easier to get volunteers. Any of those experiences, can you resonate with any of those? And here's the thing. When we do those sorts of things to try and keep the things that used to work going, every time we sort of have to manufacture energy to keep it going. That meatball dinner, we gotta get those volunteers. We gotta keep doing that. And we manufacture energy to keep it going. And here's what I think, the last couple of years as we ran into COVID, or COVID ran into us, however you want to say it, it's sort of like if you had that crack in your windshield, and in Minnesota, here's what happens. You leave your car outside, and it gets to like 30 below, and then you come out to your car, and this is what's happened. Right? I think what happened during COVID is it sort of, things kind of shattered. And it sort of forced us to look in the mirror and forced us to sort of face the realities of what's been happening in the church for a really long time. I'm going to show a few slides here with some statistics about what's been going on in the church over the last decade. And for some of you, it might be brand new. For others of you, you're going to nod your head and go, yep, because you felt it in your own family. My dad was a pastor, grew up in the church. My brother and I, in our family, we have 5 kids. We're the only ones who attend church. And we have felt that things have changed. And I'm guessing in your own family, maybe you've got kids, maybe you've got a spouse, maybe you've got people you really care about. They're not coming to church the way you did as a kid. Here's a great slide. This comes from Gallup. Way over here on this side of the slide, 1940. And what's interesting about the church is that what this graphs is the number of people who are members of church, the percentage of people in America who are members of church. So way back when, in 1940, up until about the year 2000, about 70 to 75% of Americans were members of a church. In 2000, between 2000 and 2020, you can see the decline. It went from about 70%, and for the first time in 2020, it was below 50% of Americans were part of a church. 47%. There's been this rapid decline in the last 20 years. Here's the interesting thing. If you're of my vintage, it was back here when the church was still kind of at this 70% level that I was trained to be a pastor. And now I'm leading the church in a different era. Things have changed. I was trained to lead a church that actually doesn't exist anymore, in a world that doesn't exist anymore. Here's a brand new slide that comes from Pew. They talk about the percentage of Americans who claim to be Christian. Back here in 1972, it was 90%. Today, it's 64%. And you can see the varying probable futures that number potentially could go as low as 35%. Many of you have heard of kind of a new category of religious affiliation. They call it the nuns, people who affiliate with no religious background whatsoever. And we got a slide about that way back when it was about 5% in 1972. Today it's at 30%. And here you can see what they imagine as we move towards 2070. All God's people say, oofda. Now, if you put those two slides together, here's what it looks like. And I don't need to tell you what that could look like in the future. Some of you are Lutheran of the ELCA flavor. And often I think in our denomination, we go, well, that's happening in the world. That's probably the Baptists and the evangelicals. It's not happening to us. Well, here's what's happening in the ELCA. This was done by Luther Seminary. In 2017, attendance in the ELCA, weekly attendance, was about 900,000. What they're projecting by the year 2040, if the current trends continue, is that we will lose 98% of that attendance. 98% of the people who call themselves Christian in the Lutheran denomination will have walked away by then. Our weekly attendance would be less than 16,000. Again, all God's people say, oofda. Here's something interesting about leaders today. During the pandemic, Barna did all kinds of research on pastoral leaders. And in October of 2021, 51% of pastors considered leaving ministry. Think about that. So look around the room at some of these pastor types. If you think your pastor didn't consider leaving ministry during the pandemic, you're fooling yourself, right? It was hard. For every 3 pastors who are retiring right now in our tradition, there's only 1 coming out of seminary. Now, I see on your faces a lot of sort of depression right now. So out in the lobby, we've got antidepressants for everyone. But here's what we want to do. Clarity begins with what? Honesty. I think for a long time we've been fooling ourselves that we're still the church, that society is the same society it was 50 years ago. Folks, it has changed. Clarity begins with honesty. This morning we want to be honest. And so here's how this is going to work. At the end of each talk, we're going to spend some time at your table talking about what you've heard. And so we're going to practice that. I'm sort of the guinea pig. We're going to practice that. We got 4 questions we're going to put on the screen. And we're going to spend 10 minutes just having conversation at your table. On your table, there's all kinds of paper. Feel free to scribble on that, draw on that, do whatever you want. You've also got a kind of your plan, your action plan. What I would like at each table for someone to keep notes for your church. Keep notes as to what you talked about in the next 10 minutes. So here are the 4 questions we're going to wrestle with. Did anything of what I said surprise you? Any of these statistics about the realities of the church surprise you? Secondly, what have you been ignoring? When you think about your church, and what trends have you been ignoring, saying, yeah, that's not that big a deal? Thirdly, where are you manufacturing energy? And lastly, given these realities, how will we need to change in order to lead? All right, can you do that? Thumbs up? Awesome. Clarity begins with honesty. So we're going to turn the lights up a little bit. We're going to take 10 minutes to have some conversation. Awesome.